this yesterday when I got to looking at a calendar that we're getting way down on our time together. So looks like we've got today and maybe 5 or 6 more classes is all we've got. So I'm gonna have to pick up the pace a little bit to at least finish this chapter. And this one is a key chapter that we need to talk about as we move through this introduction to plant science. So if I go too fast or skip over something that you got any question about, stop me and pull my chain and make sure that I spend adequate amount of time on whatever we're talking about. But we're going to talk today, picking up from where we left off, talk about stems in plants. And that's the main vascular system of seed-bearing plants. And it consists of the pericycle, the phloem, the vascular cambium, the xylem, the pith rays, and the pith. But that's the main structure that, excuse me. I may have to go get some water, but that's the main components of the. Excuse me a minute. Let me go get some water, because if not, I'm going to be coughing all class. Be back just a second. Okay. I wanted to bring some with me, but I didn't do it this morning.
Well, I'll try.
Talking about the vascular cambium, these different structures are the key components of the vascular cambium system in seed-bearing plants. So, we need to have an idea of what they are. And there's several photographs or figures in your textbook that outline the visual, give you the visual idea of the way this stuff looks. But the xylem and phloem are key structures that conduct water and nutrients upward in the plant, and then the manufactured sugars and so forth downward in the plant. So you need to make sure that you understand what those are. Getting so much background noise, I don't know whether I can talk over it.
Oh, does that matter?
Maybe a little bit, yeah. As we talk about woody perennials, there is a pore or an opening that exists on many of the stems, and it also exists on some of the fruits of different woody perennials. An apple, for example, and what I'm speaking of is a lenticel, and it's a pore or an opening that allows inward and outward diffusion of gases. So when we're talking about a lenticel, if you can picture the picture that's in the book is one of the bark of a birch tree, and you can see it's basically a lighter colored bark, and it's got little openings that are horizontal in nature on the outer bark of that tree. But if you ever have an apple, and I've got one here in my hand, this happens to be a Golden Delicious, and it's got a little dots. It's the only way I can describe it. And they're little portions that are somewhat raised on this particular apple. And I brought the golden because it's a little better visual of it. But those little dots are actually lenticels. And in Golden Delicious, as they are growing and fairly immature, they're almost perfectly smooth, almost as smooth as a mirror. But as they begin to mature and ripen, these lenticels or pores will actually enlarge, and that's one of the tells on an apple of this type, so you can determine maturity. Golden Delicious that is perfectly smooth as a mirror is one that's been picked in an immature fashion, and it will not have the flavor or the sugar content that one that shows these lenticels that are a little bit larger. If you let it stay on the tree and get full maturity, sometimes these lenticels will actually get to the large enough that they actually rupture and give it a real rough finish. But this is just an example, a visual of the lenticel that we're talking about. But they allow for gas exchange in the bark or in the fruits of some of these trees we're talking about. All right. As we talk about stems, the stems of apple and cherry and pear and plum trees also bear flowers, and the appendage on a stem that is a fruit-bearing structure is called a spur, and young or immature apple trees don't have very many spurs because they're immature and haven't reached a bearing age. But as they gain a little more age and a little more maturity, you'll see them begin to what we call throw or produce these spurs. Pears are that way. Peach trees don't usually do that because they bear their fruit on 1-year-old wood. But apples and peaches, apples, cherries, and plums and pears bear their fruit on spurs that are little appendages off of the shoots. Now, stems also grow horizontally on plants like pumpkins and cucumbers, and they are fruiting bodies as well. So we also have underground stems that grow on some plants, and they're also quite often called bulbaceous plants. And we'll talk about those a little bit. When we talk about stems of some of the annual plants, we've got generally two types of stems. The above ground ones that bear leaves and flowers, and then we've got underground stems. And underground stems that we're talking about here are ones that will, on the terminal ends, produce an enlarged portion that swell and accumulate starches and sugars. And this enlarged stem that we're talking about is a tuber. It's a T-U-B-E-R. And I would venture to say that there are 3 of you in that classroom, and I'd be willing to bet that each of you have consumed a portion of a tuber that's 4 or 5 days. Yes, Miss Katie?
I know what they are.
You know what they are?
I like frying them up. I like them in all
You
kinds.
what? You what? You fry them up.
Potatoes? Is that what you're talking about? French fries?
Yep. From a white potato, an Irish potato. Quite often called. But that's what we're talking about with a tuber. And that's a little different structure than what we have with a sweet potato. We'll talk about those when we get a little farther. But a tuber has buds. They're often called an eye, and that's a little indention on the tuber that is actually another growing point. It will form a new stem, and that's how we propagate or reproduce potatoes. And it's amazing to me as I've gone through a number of years with these classes, a lot of folks have absolutely no idea how potatoes are grown. They don't know how they're reproduced, and don't realize what's going on. So tells me a little bit about the population of folks that we've exposed to this class. So, but that's what we're talking about with with potatoes. The underground portion will produce a new above ground stem. So, all right. Another type of stem that we talk about is a rhizome, and it's an underground stem that grows horizontally. Um, we've got some examples of that quite often are best examples that we have are some grasses such as Bermuda grass and Johnson grass, sometimes bamboo. Some people are not familiar with the bamboo and the way it grows, but it can be a pretty invasive type plant because of the predominance of these underground stems or rhizomes. And another one that we have is a stolon. It's another stem that grows horizontally, but it differs from the rhizome in that the stolon grows above ground where the rhizome is underground. We had a situation in class in the last few days. May have been something else that I was doing, but somebody was talking about the problem that they had with Bermuda grass invading flower beds. And apparently it was from a neighbor who had a Bermuda grass lawn that they prized. Don't know why they would, but some people are really enamored with Bermuda grass. But it's that Bermuda grass is invasive, and it actually would cross the property line and invade this individual's flower beds. And it's a horrible type of invasion because it's nearly impossible to eliminate. These underground stems have little joints or places in them that when you try to dig it out and pull it up, they'll break off, and every time it breaks, you've propagated it. You created another growing plant. So it's a real problem to handle, either mechanically or chemically. So that. But a stolon is a stem that grows above ground. Any of you got an example of what we're talking about with a stolon?
A spider plant?
Spider plant is one, yeah. You don't really, a lot of people don't know what spider plants are, but it's an ornamental plant, and that's the way they are most easily propagated. It'll throw a stolon, and then it'll have a little daughter plant that actually will produce roots, aerial roots, and they're real easy to break loose and put in a pot. Give me another example of a stolon.
Strawberry runners?
Strawberry runner, exactly. Yep. And that's the way that a lot of strawberries are propagated. They'll let that usually occurs after the crop has finished and the plant begins to gather reserves and carbohydrates, and that's when they'll throw these stolons or runners, as we talk about them, and they'll run out anywhere from 8 to 12 to 14 inches, and then it'll touch the ground and it'll throw another little plant. And you can actually cut those after they begin to develop and move plants. You can
what about
appreciate. Go ahead.
They're called like angel leaf plants.
Yeah, that would be another example. I'm not real familiar with that one, but I do know that that's one of the what they'll do.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can take a piece of it and you put it in water, and then it'll start to.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you'll leave it connected and put it in put that portion down on some sort of pot or growing media, some soil or something, it'll grow roots without ever putting it in water. But that's an example of what we're talking about with stolons or runners. They're above ground or aerial type stems. Another stem form that we deal with, and it's not as common, or we don't talk about it as much unless you happen to be in the horticultural industry, but a corum is a thickened, compressed stem that grows underground. Buds on the corum sprout to produce upright stems which bear leaves and flowers. Gladiola, crocus, are some examples of a corum. You can plant the corum, and a lot of people call them bulbs, but they're not. They're actually corums, and you plant that, and it'll produce these little stems on the underside portion of it that produces the stems and the flowers, or the flowers and the leaves. All right, a bulb is a highly compressed underground stem which has many storage leaves or scales attached. One or more of the buds on the bulb will sprout in the spring to produce an elongated stem with leaves and flowers. Again, these are primarily horticultural crops with an exception or two, but hyacinths, lilies, tulips are example of those. And we've got another example that's really common. It's grown in your garden, and that's an onion. And an onion is a bulb. So
Radish?
radish is not.
No.
Radish is a root crop. It is grown from seed, and you'll get a rosette or a cluster of leaves, and then it'll begin to produce the root, the tap root. It's usually enlarged. You have different varieties of radishes. Some of them are round, and some of them are more elongated. We grew radishes in that hydroponic LED study that we did for VDAC several years ago. And it was amazing how quick we could crop radishes in those artificial conditions. But it was another addition to the thing we were doing. All right, as we talk about stems, leaves develop in a complex series closely associated with stem development. Leaves are very distinctive as we talk about them, and they're quite varied with the difference between monocots and dicots, and most of the monocots have strap-shaped leaves with parallel veins, and sometimes they have intervenous connections, but most of those are that's what we talk about with the monocots. And there's a picture in your textbook that talks about the different stem forms for them. And if I was natured like the person that I had to do an introduction to plant science class for me, we'd spend quite a bit of time talking about the different shapes of leaves. But have you guys ever thought about the different types of leaves that exist? The shapes and the margins and the arrangement of leaves? How many different types exist? You've got simple leaves, compound leaves, you've got all sorts of different margins, you've got all sorts of those, and they're listed in the textbook, and it's just an amazing type of thing. And most plants will have a single leaf structure, have leaves that are of a common shape on an individual plant. And I've spent most years I try to bring out that we have a particular plant that grows in our region that is a little unique in my eyes in that it has 3 different leaf shapes on the same plant.
Wow. So, what is that?
Yeah. Do what, Carol?
What is it?
I was going to let you tell me what it was.
I don't know.
Sassafras.
Yes, sir. It is a sassafras, and it's one of the distinguishing characteristics about a sassafras. And I know in our area in the last week or 10 days, the majority of the sassafras leaves have fallen. So but I'm sure that they're still probably hanging on in the area where you guys are. So, if you have an opportunity, you can find the sassafras, you can look at those. They've got a little oval-shaped leaf, and then they've got one that looks like a mitten, and then they've got one that's got 3 lobes on it. So quite often, about this time of year, they'll turn a bright yellow, depending upon the season. I know the ones here last week were pretty yellow, and we had 25-degree temperatures over the weekend, and we've had a little bit of rain and some wind, so a lot of our leaves went on the ground. But from weather that I heard last night, the leaf color is in its peak in the area where you guys are sitting. So
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
If you have a chance and can spot a sassafras. One year I gave that as an extra point opportunity for folks to determine what that was and bring me a sample of the leaves. But we're not going to have time to do that this semester. We've lost a little time, and I've been too verbose about some things. So, we'll skip that. But that's what I'm talking about with leaves. Leaves are enough. There's enough distinction in them that they are a primary indicator of various types of oak trees. That was one of the things when I took a dendrology class that we used to determine the different varieties of oaks. The wood of oak is very similar, but the leaves are have very distinguishing characteristics.
The oak leaves. Like longer, like not pointy, right?
Yeah, a white oak tends to have a smooth margin and 5 or 6 lobes with a central midrib. But a red oak is going to be similar, except instead of having a smooth margin, it's going to be more serrated. It's going to be sharpened. And a black oak is going to be different than that. Pin oaks are different than that. A willow oak is very much like what you say. Think of it as being a willow. It's just a single type leaf. And you may have heard the mowers running outside the window here a minute ago. We've got willow oaks right here in the quad on campus, and that's what the guys were doing. They were trying to get up willow oak leaves again before it rains on them. Of the oaks, if you're thinking of a tree to put in a lawn or a landscape situation, you want a large tree. A willow oak is a mighty good choice because it's a strong, tall, large tree, but the leaves are not as cumbersome, not as problematic as leaves from a chestnut oak or a black oak or a white oak, because leaves are smaller. They're like a willow, and will just sort of fade into the landscape. You don't have as much damage to your lawn with leaves from willow oaks as you will from the others. Talks about or gives you examples of different margins of leaves. Talks about an odd palmate and an even pinnate, and then a palmate, a trifoliate, all sorts of leaf arrangements. And then we talk about, it also gives you examples of the way the leaf and the stem coordinate themselves, and that they're quite different. So, there's we don't have time to go into that, and I don't know that that emphasizing it much more would benefit you in any way, unless you're going to go into dendrology and the identification of these different species. But there's a lot of difference as we think about these leaves and their attachments and so forth. All right, we'll talk a little more about stems and stem forms. One of the key things that we need to take away from stems and leaves is the idea that we've got the on the outer layer of the skin of a leaf, we've got epidermal cells, and in those epidermal cells, you've got openings or pores that are called stomates. Or if you're talking about a single one, it's a stomata. And that's an opening or pore that allows the gas exchange from the leaf. And that opening is controlled by two guard cells, one on each side of it, and it tells that opening whether to be open or closed based on the physiology and the needs of the plant. These openings control the transpiration, the loss or exchange of moisture through from the leaf. That controls temperature. It also controls the exchange of gases in the way of carbon dioxide that is emitted, or the oxygen that's emitted through the photosynthetic process. So, stomates and guard cells are essential to the function of plants and plant metabolism, as we talk about. You'll see situations, and I'll use the tobacco that grows in the area where you guys are. When it gets extremely hot and dry, you'll notice that the tobacco will essentially wilt, or what we call flop. And that's where the leaf has lost its turgidity, and these stomates have closed and changed the physiology of the leaf. In other words, it's not allowing it to photosynthesize anymore, and it's reduced the exchange of gases and moisture from that leaf to the outside. Corn will do the same thing, but instead of flopping down like a tobacco leaf will, it will twist up and make a tighter structure for the plant. You'll see, quite often you'll see corn when it gets hot and dry, it'll kind of twist up. It doesn't look as vigorous as it did. It kind of reduces, and that's part of the action and reaction of the stomates and the guard cells that it has. So, all right, it says the guard cells control the opening and closing of stomata through which carbon dioxide enters and oxygen is released. That's what we're talking about with the activities of photosynthesis. It says water also enters and escapes through the stomata. I want to make sure you understand that. The loss of water from a leaf by evaporation is called transpiration, and it helps to regulate leaf temperature, like what I was talking about. Now, some leaves and plants have a very thick, waxy surface, which helps to reduce water loss. And we've talked about it very briefly, but an example of a plant that has a very heavy, waxy layer is a cabbage leaf or broccoli leaf, if you're familiar with that. If you've ever tried to spray an insecticide or any sort of material on a cabbage or broccoli plant, it just beads up and rolls off, just like you just waxed your car. It just forms a bead and doesn't wet it. So, as we talked about in our chemical application class, you can add something to your spray material or your solution that you're trying to wet it with, to break that surface tension that's created by that waxy layer, and that would be the addition of what we call a spreader, or actually it's a soap. So if you've ever tried to spray your cabbage and your water's running off, step in the house and get your bottle of Joy or Dawn or whatever, and put a little squirt in your spray tank, and shake it up, and then instead of beating up and running off, it'll flatten that solution out, and so you can wet that cabbage leaf or broccoli leaf, whatever it might be. But that's because of the thick waxy layer, that the cuticle that exists on the outer layer of the leaf. All right, as we talk about different stem forms, we've got some some more definitions. You know, we always have a lot of definitions. So when we're talking about a leaf of a dicot is made up of a blade. That's the flat, thin portion when we're talking about dicot. So it's, and the petiole is the stem or the portion that attaches the blade to the stem. Then you've got little stipules which are at the base of the petiole, and that's one of the things I was talking about when we talked about the diagrams of the different leaf forms. They've got quite a difference in the stipules and the way the petioles are attached. We've got a lot of leaves that are sometimes categorized as simple leaves, and we've got some that are compound leaves. A simple leaf would be one that just has a single blade, and a compound leaf would be one that has a stem with one or two or three more leaflets on it. If you've ever pictured a hickory, the leaf of a hickory, it's going to be a compound leaf. A walnut tree, that's a compound. A locust has a compound leaf, as opposed to simple leaves like an oak would have. Talks about a pinnate and a palmate type of leaf structure. And a trifoliate, that's a compound leaf with three leaflets. All right, as we move, we'll try to cover this deal with buds a little bit before we close today. But buds are produced by stems, and they are generally in the axils of leaves. So if you can picture, we talked about a tobacco plant as an example. You've got the main stem, and you've got the leaves, the petioles attached to that main stem. But in the axil, in other words, in the armpit where that stem attaches, where the leaflet attaches to the stem, there is a bud. And that's true for a lot of the plants that we deal with. They have buds located in the axils of these things. And the fact that they're there is an opportunity for us to manipulate these plants or deal with them. As we talk about the tobacco, when you top the tobacco, in other words, take out the terminal bud, the growing point, that changes the hormone balance in that plant and enables the elimination of those auxins and gibberellins that are growing in that terminal bud, allow that axillary bud to begin to break and grow, which actually begins to be a sucker in the tobacco plant. Same thing would happen if you topped your tomato plants. It's going to produce a sucker to begin to grow. So vegetative buds develop into shoots. Flower buds will produce flowers, and then sometimes you have mixed buds which will produce both shoots and flowers. Buds on deciduous plants generally overwinter when leaves have fallen off. So these plants that are currently in the process of going into dormancy, they're going to have a bud. It's a dormant looking bud that existed in the axil of the leaf. But that's going to be a growing point for the beginning of growth for the next year. And it's essential for the survival of these species that we're talking about. Okay, when we move into the next portion here, it talks about flowers. And flower buds form from the differentiation of vegetative buds into flower parts. And the angiosperms produce flowers which enable sexual reproduction. And as a product of that, if you have fertilization, you're going to have a fruit that begins to develop as a result of that fertilization, and is going to produce seeds. So flowers or inflorescence vary in the shape dependent upon the species, the genus, and the family. And in some years, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about flowers. And flowers are essential for the production of most of our edible crops that we talk about. And it gets kind of complicated at times when we talk about it, because we've got different compounds or different types of flowers. We've got ones that have a primary stigma and ovary in the center, and then you've got petals and anthers and filaments and style and stigma and so forth. And it can be somewhat confusing as we begin to talk about these. So, when we talk about different flowers, the flower structure of an apple flower is different than the flower structure of a peach, because of the difference in the seed structure that exists. A peach seed has a single ovary, where an apple is going to have a multiple of seeds in it. It's going to have carpels, and will have generally 5 carpels that each will contain 2 ovaries or 2 seeds. And so that difference is exhibited by the differences in the formations of the flowers. And we won't get into it today because we're about to run out of time, and we'll need to spend a little bit of time and allow you an opportunity to look at these different types of flower structures as we move along. So flowers are essential. They are tools that our plant breeders have used to generate new varieties. They're a product of they're the mechanism that they use to do that. When I was in Blacksburg, there was an old gentleman that spent his entire academic career, about 40 years, cutting and manipulating different flower forms. He was a plant breeder, and he would cut the anthers, pistils out of plants, and put pollen from another plant into that. And if you ever think about it, he would do that, say, this past spring, and save the seeds from the apple that was produced, and hold them over the winter, and then germinate those seeds next spring, and eventually begin to grow a tree that he would take 5 to 6 years to begin to produce the potential of a new variety. And the old gentleman, he was just a peach of a nice guy, but he had more patience than 40 folks ought to have because of his plant breeding. And he was doing it the old way. There's a lot of new things that have been done to expedite plant breeding, but Dr. Oberle was a real treasure. He developed an awful lot of peach varieties that have been the mainstay of the peach industry in the state of Virginia for the last 40 or 50 years. So, I'll let you go. I know you guys have got a test that you're concerned about here in a few minutes, so we'll pick up and talk about flowers a little bit more when we get back together on Thursday. Good luck on your test.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you Thursday.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. See you, Tom.
Yep.